Okay, so for those of you who haven't been to a Black Hat before, let me just give you a quick overview of what to expect, and then I'll move on to some general announcements. There's one schedule change, and then I'll introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, Jerry Dixon. So the concept with Black Hat is that we offer a vendor-neutral platform, and we try to create an open exchange of ideas where you get to question the speakers, the presenters, you get to interact with your peers, and have some beers. It's generally meant to be a lighthearted affair where it's tech-heavy, kind of geek-heavy, and we shy away from a lot of the social preconceptions about what can and can't technically happen in the security space. And so because of that, we want to foster a sense of community, not only at the show, but we try to foster a sense of community outside of the show. And we do that in a number of ways. For those of you not aware, we give away all of our content for free, video and audio, after we get a chance to encode it. But we also make all the presentations and PowerPoints available online for free for those who aren't as lucky as you to be here. We have a store thing at iTunes with all of our video and audio in podcast format. So if you want to grab that, listen to it, it's all in MP3 format. Check out all of our past shows, share it. We also have an RSS entry, and just recently we started, I hate saying this, the social, we started a LinkedIn group, and it's actually turned out to be pretty cool. So it's not really a social thing, it's more of a business-oriented thing, but if you use LinkedIn, join the Black Hat group and meet everybody else like yourself who's interested in security. We take feedback very seriously, so if you see something you like or something you don't like, fill out the feedback form and give it to us, and you could win free admission to a future Black Hat. It's our way of thanking you for taking time to help us close the feedback loop with some of our speakers. And because we strive to bring you fresh content, we really try to find interesting speakers. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, you know. Sometimes you take a risk with someone and it doesn't work out. Sometimes you take a risk with them and it's fantastic. So that's why we like to know what you thought. These aren't all just tried and true professional speakers. Sometimes tech guys aren't professional speakers. Now, something else we try to do is create, besides a tech environment, we try to create a more social environment. And one way we do that is we have a reception this evening, and you eat and drink and meet with your peers and talk all you can. And to expand that social aspect of the show this year, I'm stealing an idea from DEF CON, which is immediately after each session, you get done listening to Jerry, you've got some questions for him, follow him over to the speaker Q&A room. Each session has a dedicated speaker Q&A room, and the speaker will be available for the full hour after each of their sessions. So if you want to spend more time in a smaller environment asking them questions, just follow them over there. For the A room, it's right next door in the East room, and for these two rooms, they'll pull an air wall here. For these two rooms, it's over in the Woodlawn room, which is right over there. I'm sorry, it's the Stratford Hall right over there. And this is to give you just more face-to-face time with the speakers. I mean, you came here to see them, so we're trying to give you a greater opportunity to be exposed. Okay, let me tell you the one schedule change today at 15:15 in Ballroom A, instead of, what is it, Sudi and SacFind, we have David Litchfield on attacking Oracle systems. There was a schedule printing error, and somehow the wrong people are listed in the schedule. So put David Litchfield in for Ballroom A at 15:15. If you want to get involved, you like the speeches, you think you've got something cool or cooler, and you want to get involved, the call for papers is now open for our USA event. And this year we're trying something I've wanted to do for a couple of years, which is if you're an attendee and you give me money, and I've got your money, and you're in the registration system, you can now review all the submissions we're getting in the CFP system. You don't get to see everything that reviewers get to see, like their home phone numbers, so you can harass them or anything. But you get a limited view of what their abstract is. what they're going to be talking about. And you get to rate all the submissions. So you get to help steer all of our future content. And the first show we're trying that out at is the Big USA show. And there's a number of other improvements I want to introduce throughout this year to get everybody more involved in this whole process. Okay. Don't forget to ask questions of the speakers. This is not a pure lecture-oriented environment. If you see something they say that you don't agree with, raise your hands. If they say something that's incorrect, you know, don't be mean about it, but correct them. Let everybody know what the real deal is. Now, for this conference, we've got attendees from 22 countries, including the Republic of Korea, the UAE, Colombia, Argentina, Japan, Canada, Mexico. We've got people from all over. 5 continents represented this day. The wireless network is open, but as usual, use at your own risk. Shouldn't have to tell you that. Turn your phones over to meeting or vibrate mode so we don't get annoying rings. And as I said earlier, after the last speaker today, there's a reception. During the reception, we also have a guest speaker from the Spy Museum, Peter Ernst, who's going to be telling some interesting war stories, spy stories, literally, in this room. So if you want to grab a beer, listen to that, hang out with your friends, we've got some late night entertainment for you. So I want to thank all of our speakers who've taken the time to produce all the materials for you. They do a lot of research. They spend a lot of time beating their head against walls just to show you what they've discovered. I also want to thank the sponsors. Without the sponsor support in marketing this event and giving us support on mailing lists, it would be really hard to reach the audience we want to reach. It's a really competitive market, and our sponsors really help us out there. They're only going to be out there for today, so if you see something cool or a booth you want to check out, they're not going to be around tomorrow. Go there today. You'll miss the opportunity if you wait till tomorrow. And also I want to thank you attendees, everybody, for, as I said, paying us money, making this event happen. We are really responsive to your interests, so if you say, you know, Jeff, this year you're doing a lot of wireless and you're doing some hardware security, and that's really cool, but you know, I only see 1 track of web app security, I really want 5. You need to grow this thing and make it all web app. We'll take that into consideration. This year we specifically chose wireless because a lot of interesting things are happening in that space, and hardware, just because as researchers are starting to turn toward JTAG ports and embedded debugging, we're starting to see all kinds of hardware devices fall. And I really wanted to draw some attention to that, to let you think, especially here in DC, you wrap something up in a little token, that doesn't really mean anything. It might be a feel-good for about 5 minutes, but then when you think about it, you realize it's really not. All right, everybody, it's time to join me with a warm welcome for Jerry Dixon, who recently retired from the government. He's now a normal civilian like all of us. He used to be the National Cybersecurity Executive Director, U.S. Cert for DHS, and then before that he was a founding director at the IRS Computer Security Incident Response Capability Team. And he's going to talk a little bit about his holy grail of online fraud and what companies and government might be able to do to help mitigate this growing threat. So, for those of you who know Jerry and those who don't, let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. It's definitely an honor to be here today before everybody. Some of the things, the primary focus of my talk today is basically going to be on electronic crimes. Given a lot of recent talks on things like Aurora, control systems, and the cyber initiative, and those types of things. That I won't be focusing on in this one, but basically wanted to kind of give you a sense of some of the trends that we're seeing from the company I'm with, Team Cumry, from a electronic crimes perspective. Andy Freed, we're kind of tag teaming this a little bit. It's going to go into more of the specifics of what the IRS and Treasury is seeing from a phishing and online crime perspective. So I think it'll be a pretty well-rounded talk. Obviously, with regards to the Holy Grail, we're obviously talking about, money, our personally identifiable information, and just information in general. One of the things, in my former role at U.S. CERT, we dealt with a wide range of incidents. Usually we would not respond or react or participate in helping organizations out unless it was really significant. We can't go all over the country or the globe for that matter. But some of the things that we've been involved with at the state level, things that we've been involved with, some companies within the Fortune 5 and the Fortune 500, government agencies, almost every one of them was obviously around information, people trying to extract, doing corporate espionage. To give you an example, very large company was in the process of trying to do an acquisition, and basically their competition pretty much had their entire, what they were bidding and what they're working against and all the inside information. The challenge was when you get into those environments is that they were a global company. So, we're all interconnected. They had, in some instances, other parts of their competition they were partnered with, so you kind of had a virtual insider type situation where their networks were interconnected. And because it was such a large global network, there's no way to actually say, aha, here's the smoking gun, here's how they got the information. So, it speaks to some of the challenges of trying to figure out, how are they getting at the data? And one of the things that's consistent in most of the incidents I've been involved with is that, most organizations don't have a good handle where all their critical data resides and who they're sharing that data with, meaning, whether your interconnections and what have you. So we're going to touch a little bit out on that. One of the interesting things, when you look at over the last several years, and as long as Jeff has been hosting Black Hat and DEF CON, there's been a lot of interesting changes. A lot has gone from fame and fortune and trying to make a name for themselves. We haven't seen a lot of the major worms out there days gone by, and basically what we're seeing is motivated and persistent adversaries, because it's all about the money. And basically we're seeing the level of the tools that are being utilized is very sophisticated. Some of the software that's being used to command a lot of the botnets, very sophisticated. You would think that it was almost like a CMM level 3, Carnegie Mellon type software engineering practices being put into the software. We'd actually worked, to give you an example, we worked with some of the antivirus companies, because when I was on the government side, how do you protect the largest group of folks? You got to go work with the information security vendors. And the way to do that is you get critical information over to them so they can incorporate it into their products. So if we found something through an incident investigation or through forensic analysis, we wanted to get it out there, they'd create an update and push it out to everybody. Well, in some instances, we'd work with the vendors, and we'd actually, within a matter of a couple hours, see the tactics change on some of the intrusion activity that we were dealing with at the time. And again, they were very aggressive at trying to get at that information. So the point is, it's a complicated world out there. A lot of, software is very complicated. A lot of the protocols are complicated. There's a lot of opportunity to exploit that, as you just heard, with embedded systems. I know DHS is very focused on dealing with control systems related issues. That's where a lot of the embedded systems are. A lot of that's legacy systems. To give you an example of some of the challenges there is that, I had the opportunity to meet with about 25 top CISOs of a lot of the utility companies. Basically, some of the things that they're up against, they always talk about segregation of their networks. Well, we don't keep our networks connected to our administrative side, and more often than not you would find out that they were connected through either red teaming activity. I asked a simple question, how many of you were using VoIP? Half the room's hands went up. I asked, well, do you run a home run from your administrative network into where the operations control center was that manages the process control systems? You got a mixed response on that, and actually a lot of them were actually running that across their the VoIP across their process control system network or their SCADA network. So it wasn't really segregated. So, light bulbs started going off. So again, it speaks to the challenge of adopting emerging technologies. One of the other interesting tidbits, within just a year's time frame, when I was at US CERT, we had over 1 million username and passwords compromised. We had gotten it through a law enforcement source. We actually reached out to a lot of these companies and said, hey, we think, these are your actual usernames and accounts. Can you validate these? And surprisingly, more than 90% of those were validated. So when you think about 1 million usernames and passwords, it was affecting private sector organizations, affecting government organizations. Nobody was immune. Those, that some of them went and actually, changed the passwords. Some of these organizations had over 100,000 users. Imagine the amount of, the help desk call volume, and when you go force everybody to change their password, it's a big deal, especially across a large enterprise network. Well, 2 weeks later, we got more information. Those that changed it had to go back and change it again. So somehow they either had an insider or there was an intrusion. It was very difficult to figure out how they were getting that information. We didn't have that information at the time, but again, because of the source, it was valid information. Now, those that were doing two-factor authentication didn't have that problem because the attacker didn't have that extra piece to be able to log in. And some of those companies, they actually use the same network ID for their virtual private networks. So if I knew how to point to the right virtual private network or their VPN server concentrator, I had free access into that environment. So we still have a long ways to go from trying to raise the bar from a security perspective. Let me see. So, with Team Cumry, we've got an interesting set of data, and this is from the organization I just recently joined. And just last year, in 2007, we had identified over 3 million command and control channels and relationships there. So it's a huge amount of botnets out there. Kind of touches on some of the problem. In that instance, we also had over 26 million different DNS domains identified that were either hosting malware or involved in fast flux or a number of those kinds of things. So it kind of lets you know how bad the problem really is out there. One of the interesting things, and we just actually posted this on our Team Cumry website. If you go to Cumry.com, this is what's called a Hilbert curve, or what we refer to as a heat map. All those blue areas that you see up there are basically, each box represents 4,096 IP addresses, or you're getting into /8s. So if you look at number 24 up here, basically, when you start to look down and dig into that network, for the purpose of this talk, I'm not going to drill down, but you'll find providers like Comcast and a lot of home internet service providers. All that blue stuff that you're seeing is actually where malicious activity is taking place. It's either websites that are serving up malicious software. It's either stuff that we've identified where networks have been intruded upon, or botnets or what have you. So it kind of shows you what the neighborhood looks like. At DHS and even at IRS, we used to have these maps that showed where the crime waves were. And we often, if you're looking to buy a new house, for instance, you might want to check out how bad is this neighborhood that I'm going to move into. Well, this kind of shows you how bad the internet neighborhood is, and then you can keep drilling down. If you go out to the website, you can take a much closer look at it. One of the things I was going to do was actually, I could have broken it apart since, the SysDC. I was going to, take a lot of the government network block space and, kind of show that picture of what, the malicious activity looked like from a government perspective. But for the purpose of this talk, I didn't want to go there today. Now, if you look over here, this is actually a snapshot of the website. But if you look over here in the bottom, you'll actually see this is actually updated every 24 hours. We always, joke at Team Cumry, what's in your wallet. Right here, you'll actually see what's being traded on the underground economy. The top credit cards that are moving that we're seeing from a traffic perspective is, MasterCard and Visa, and then you get down into the American Express, which is the darker blue there. And the Discover is just like a really tiny sliver. So it's kind of interesting to see the type of information that's going out there. That really is, essentially the holy grail for a lot of these folks. If you think about, organized crime, the Russian business network, they're basically actively going after this information, and it's a big business. It's always interesting, we talk about protective steps and measures, and, we constantly still finding old malicious and, viruses and worms and things that are out on the net. We have several different types of sandboxes. We use a couple commercial and some in-house, as well as, we have over 32 AV engines, and we actually ran over 10,000 malware samples, and only 37% of it was detected. One of the interesting trends that we see on a regular basis is when we come across a new piece of malicious software, is that, out of these 32 antivirus engines, we have them from all over the globe. And you'll kind of, in some instances, we'll actually see where they start testing the malware against their home country's antivirus before it hits anybody else's, just to see if it's being detected or not. And then you start looking at it, and then it starts to expand as people start to become more aware of it, and as it's starting to be found out in the wild. So it kind of lets you know some of the, it's kind of an indicator of what's going on out there for us. As I touched on earlier, it used to be, web defacements, denial of service attacks, again, just trying to, gather fame and, look at my, elite skills, that kind of thing. But today, the hacker community is all grown up. Very sophisticated techniques. A lot of the security mechanisms we put into place, they're skirting past that. We used to have well-defined boundaries with our firewalls or security infrastructure, but now we're often, because of globalization and outsourcing and offshoring, the networks are so interconnected. It's rare that you see a lot of attacks coming directly against the company. You usually go through a business partner or through some other kind of link to get at the information. That's why we emphasize really, network cognizance, being aware of where that critical data and your connections are. So it's a tough job, but you got to stay on top of it. As we touched on, it's not about developing malicious software anymore. It's basically, it's all about the people, and it's about crime. So going after our money, our information, and our identity. These are, it's always interesting what you find out on the net when you go out there and poke around. Obviously, you find birth certificates, you find social security cards, you find lots of banking information just sitting out there. And the attackers really realize, to get the money and to get at the information, you go after the computer. You no longer, it's, very low risk to the attacker in a lot of instances because it's an international challenge. Law enforcement has a lot of interesting challenges when you're starting to go deal with other countries abroad. So, it makes, going after the bad guys very tough. Plus, attribution is still extremely difficult. Just touch a little bit more on, the sophistication. We used to see a lot of internet relay chat being used for botnets. Now everybody's, a lot of the attackers in the underground's migrated over to peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer is extremely difficult it makes attribution that much more difficult. The level of, the encryption that's being used for their command and control, the size of these things that they can grow, they often have different tiers. I've got a couple of slides here. We're going to touch on, the storm arm a little bit. When you think about what their goal and their objectives, they're often looking at how can I go about getting more money and exploiting the information or selling information. If you look at a lot of the recent press articles in the news about government intrusions, I had the privilege of testifying on the Hill about some of these intrusions related to the State Department and a couple other agencies there. And, it's a constant challenge, and they're always coming up with techniques to, from defeating forensic tools and capabilities, defeating, when we talk about sandboxes, a lot of the malware is a lot of the guys, the underground's basically developing techniques to detect whether or not they're in a virtual machine that'll behave differently as it would in a real world. So what you often find yourself doing is when you're doing analysis is actually having to set up, a whole box, put it on an isolated LAN and see what happens when you're doing dynamic analysis. Whereas if, you put it on our sandboxes, which we do as well, you get different results. And sometimes it'll phone home to different systems. So it's interesting activity out there and techniques being utilized. As I said, with the thing with a lot of the new botnets today is a lot of them are very, VMware we just touched on. They're doing a lot of DNS cache poisoning, very distributed architecture. With IRC, a lot of people can set up basically black holes in their network or redirect it, figure out what hosts within their network were affected with internet relay chat. With the way they're going about it with peer-to-peer, it's a little bit more difficult to do. Very, very important to, when you're looking for malicious activity on your networks, to look at what's leaving your network. What does your outbound traffic look like? When it comes to, getting at the cache, basically, oops, it's about proxy sales, bot sales. Basically, phishing is really prevalent. We see a lot of compromised routers being utilized. In this case, click fraud is really a huge problem. In this one particular instance, there's an article about Encheta where basically, he had a botnet and basically also signed on with, was it Allow Cache and Gamma Cache, and basically would use his botnet to go basically click on the advertisements, which would generate revenue for him. So basically, you get a check in the mail every so often, a few $1,000s here. One of the challenges that he had initially was trying to figure out, how do I do this so it's not looking like it's automated to the advertisers? So it's not it doesn't look like, it is a botnet, making it more human-oriented. So, he had to expand his network and work with several different people. He ended up getting busted because his close circle of folks he was working with had to expand a little bit to help out, and that's how the law enforcement was able to track this guy down. Everybody familiar with or have heard about Storm, for the most part? So, what's interesting about Storm, and this is just kind of what the data that we, have on hand is, when you look at it, there's over 11.5 million unique IP addresses that have been associated with the Storm. When you think about the power that's there, I think Message Lab says that, they quote us saying it could be as large as 50 million machines. Peter Goodman from University of Auckland basically said, it's more powerful than some of the top supercomputers that we have in the country when you look at all that horsepower that's been put together. So there's a lot of, interesting, information on Stormworm out there on the net. And basically, when you look at, how serious they are about going after our information, looking at how serious they are about trying to get cash, and when you think about organized crime, and again, how well organized the Russian business network is, they're constantly moving countries and changing locations and using a lot of interesting ways to avoid, one who's identified behind it, and also avoiding prosecution or being chased down. So just the size of Storm, the techniques and the effort that they put into this thing has been pretty impressive. When I talk about, the software development for controlling a lot of the botnets is just an example of some of the GUIs, the graphical user interfaces they developed to control the systems. I can, if I want to tell them, hey, I want to go turn on keylogging across all these systems, or I want to go, clean yourself off all these systems, it's just a couple of mouse clicks. So it kind of shows you, again, they're pretty serious about going after our information. This one I find, kind of interesting. We see a lot more DDoS extortion. And again, this kind of speaks to, the underground's kind of grown up a bit here. This guy was basically making $37,000 a year, and basically, you can read the kind of the bad English on this email if you can see the screen all right. But basically, they wanted $1,000 to basically say, we won't DDoS you. We won't affect your income that you're bringing in, your profit that you're bringing in. Well, obviously the website owner said, you know what? We're not gonna give in to these demands. Well, they ended up receiving, a denial of service attack, peaking out at, over 20 megs, close to 21 megs per second, which caused a lot of impact to that organization. So, again, this is just another prime example of some of the things that are running rampant out there. This one's another interesting one. Basically, here you can see a bank account. We often, come across where they're got usernames, passwords, and again, those that are not doing two-factor authentication, they're able to get into various bank accounts and either clean them out, transfer the funds, do a lot of interesting things. That's what I think some of the things that Andy will go over as it relates to banking, routing numbers, and those kinds of things will be of interest here shortly. One of the other interesting things is that, as people try to, as many of you are security professionals and trying to, you might be involved with a lot of community-based efforts to try to combat some of the malicious activity and some of the online crime that's taking place out there. Well, you look at some recent articles and you look at, just as, back in January, a lot of the folks that manage a lot of the black hole list and a lot of the anti-spam websites, they're putting a dent and putting a hurting on, the folks around Storm. They're responsible for Storm. So what do? They DDoSed them. They started, striking back. We've seen, organizations like Castle Cops get knocked offline. Spam House constantly getting, attacked because, they're actually affecting, the bottom line of the bad guys. They're putting a dent in the amount of money they're collecting in, and it's forcing the bad guys to try to come up with another, a better way to get at the money. So it's very much a cat and mouse game. What are the enablers? One of the things that I often find quite interesting is when we go in, and when I've been involved with dealing with a lot of the C-level type folks at organizations that have had a major event, because it's usually they don't call US CERT unless they've actually had a major event. And basically, when you get there, you find out, they don't actually have a dedicated operational security team or an incident response team. So we try to, make them understand that, if you really care about business continuity, if you care about, business uptime, you care about, say, maybe it's a reservation system for your hotel, for instance, if that's your money maker, you need to have folks actually looking out for that system. You got to have folks that are actually, you got to have humans doing analysis on your security infrastructure. So, because there's not a huge amount of dedicated operational security folks, a lot of these activities go unnoticed until a major event happens. In a lot of instances, some of the instances in the past, the way the incident got found out was a good system administrator noticing that some unusual process was running on their, excuse me, their Unix box, and then basically reaching out and asking for help. So again, you got to have that 800 number or number within your company or organization that you can reach out to come in and kind of do the forensics and incident analysis to respond to that particular event. Network cognizance, again, and this is a really tough one, is trying to have a good handle of all the various connections across your network. Most CIOs can't tell you without a shadow of a doubt of, hey, we got 50 connections and that's it, or we got 42 connections. A lot of organizations, because of people have budget authority and the ability to procure services, think of your field offices. IRS, to give you an example, has over 750 locations. That's a lot to try to manage. So, having a team that can actually take a look at what's taking place, trying to come up with a couple of choke points for your outbound traffic, really will go a long way, and it also, help out with leveraging what limited security resources that you do have. The other one is, we need more trained cyber law enforcement personnel at the state and local level. Federal law enforcement is swamped. Federal law enforcement has to, work with other countries to, basically go after the bad guys, because again, the internet's global in nature. And we really need state and local to kind of help, do the on-the-ground first response, so to speak, instead of our federal law enforcement. So that's, kind of a tiered approach. So when it starts crossing those boundaries, federal law enforcement can work at a much higher level. The other thing that's interesting is that, been called down to the hill quite a bit and done a lot of briefings, and, the conversation's always around, well, we need new laws. We need more laws. Well, we can create all kinds of laws here within the U.S., but if we're not actively and aggressively working with other countries to try to set up similar laws or mutual law enforcement treaties, or assistance treaties, or bilats, through the State Department, it's not going to be effective because, again, it's global in nature. So from a policy perspective, we got a lot of work to do in that area. And again, as I touched on, the software is just extremely complex. If you look at it, the rush to market and getting products out there, and when introduced to different environments, and we have a lot of security researchers here that are focused on trying to find vulnerabilities and exposures, it's a challenge to stay on top of all that and keeping it patched. To give you another example, I went to a large, we're dealing again with another state, and their routing infrastructure, their hardware hadn't been updated, and the actual Cisco gear hadn't been updated in probably 6-7 years. And the challenge with that is, if you're not practicing good life cycle management, how can you upgrade to the latest iOS? Their current hardware would not support the latest iOS, which had lots of security fixes. In that particular situation, we were able to access multiple databases of their state citizens straight from the internet. So because of the exposures and how those routers, so they spent a huge amount of effort in upgrading that routing, the hardware across their network. So, again, just basic lifecycle change management and basically, every 3 to 4 years, upgrading that hardware is essential. If you can't apply the security patches, you're pretty well hosed, especially when you're talking about routers that are, your outside connection to everybody. Some of the, things that we hear when we, get on site, a lot of them go, how could this have happened to us? Well, I use NAT. Oh, okay, you're protected. Or I have a great FISMA grade. I got an A last year. Well, that's really helping you out with your operational security. My point here is that, just because, you have a DMZ or, the other famous one we often get is, well, I never thought I was a target. You typically get this when you're, sitting before, CIOs, CFOs and whatnot. And, you have to make them realize, you got a great amount of data sitting within your environment. Again, kind of touching on that holy grail, you got a lot of personally identifiable information. I know in the last just 3 years, I've gotten 4 or 5 letters letting me know that my personally identifiable information has been either compromised, lost, leaked, what have you. Some of us were a company that I'd worked with where they were doing development, and the guy, took the stuff home of all the employees, and then next thing you know, they think it got leaked out through his home internet connection. So there's all kinds of interesting challenges out there. So, my point is that you got to take a comprehensive approach to dealing with security. You really need to have dedicated operational security folks there. I mean, a combination of all these things, as I touched on earlier slide, our antivirus keeps it safe, out of 10,000 samples and you're only having a 37% detection rate. That kind of tells you need to do more than just rely on antivirus. So, with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Special Agent Andy Freed from TIGTA. He's with the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. And we'll get your slide set up here, Andy. I've known Andy for many years. He was one of the pioneers for really moving the federal law, cyber forensics program along within law enforcement, and really, getting a lot of attention and focus on it. Created a lot of training and participation at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. I think everybody that I've come across in the federal law enforcement side knows Andy because of all of his early work in really trying to get the attention and forensic techniques adopted across many organizations. But Andy can touch on a little bit more. Please welcome Andy.
Good morning. Jerry promised me he'd talk a lot longer. My name is Andy Freed. I'm a special agent with Treasury. Originally, the organization that I was with used to be part of IRS. We became an IG about 98 or 99, and we're now separate. But my job is primarily dealing with the computer security for IRS and the interconnecting networks. Just before we get started, I want to say that, a friend of mine is a professor at Baylor University, and he recently did a little presentation for his teachers at the university and asked them who in the audience had not received an IRS phishing email. And, Baylor is kind of in the middle of nowhere, and unfortunately there wasn't a single person that raised their hand. I was just kind of curious, in this audience here, is there anybody that hasn't gotten an IRS phishing email recently? Okay. Well, I'm glad you don't have email. Because we've been seeing an awful lot of it. Obviously, because of the nature of my work, I obviously can't talk about sources or methods, but I do want to talk a little bit about, what we've been seeing recently and kind of what the progression we're seeing. And I'm just going to kind of highlight phishing because it's kind of an easy to use metric. We saw the first phishing site in 2003, and interestingly enough, I was actually in Cheyenne, Wyoming, executing a search warrant when Jerry Dixon called and said, "I think we have a phishing site." And I thought he was kidding. And from a hotel room in Cheyenne, Wyoming, I actually had to effect a shutdown. That was the first one. And we figured they would leave us alone because not very many people know about the IRS. Unfortunately, I was wrong. And then again, in 2004, we had another isolated phishing site. I figured, okay, blind luck, they'll go away. And unfortunately, starting in November of 2005, they didn't go away. And in fact, right now we're up to about a little over 1,600 phishing sites. And what's interestingly, the recent trend is we have 12 to 17 times last year's levels right now. Now, these sites are not overly, successful because we do go out, we do take the sites down, we do analyze what's on them. Obviously, if they weren't making money, they wouldn't keep doing them. But I mean, we're not talking about sites that get lots of credit cards. In some cases, they could be up for an hour, 2 or 3 before we shut them down and have maybe 1 credit card on there. We've also had a number of other issues, and the reality is that the IRS is a brand just like IBM or any other large corporation. Those of you probably know around January of last year, there started to be a number of emails that went out from what was appearing to be the Better Business Bureau. And essentially this was very targeted email that primarily was going to CIOs, CFOs, presidents of companies, and it was each spammed email was individually addressed, and most were sent through botnets. The email basically would say that you've had a complaint from the Better Business Bureau, you need to fill out this form and send it back. The form was either an RTF or Adobe file that had downloaders that essentially was loading software that was looking for banking information. It was either keylogger or banking systems. We subsequently started getting emails shortly thereafter claiming to be from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, saying that you're under investigation, fill this form out. And interestingly enough, when that one came out, it was in June, and I was in Chicago on a search warrant. And the biggest concern we had wasn't necessarily that the emails were going out, because they're really not coming to the IRS. What my concern was that the next morning, when people started complaining to the Internal Revenue Service, the people who were impersonated, which was the Criminal Investigation Division, would be saying, like, what's this all about? And they would be getting these letters forwarded to them and opening them up. One of the first things I did when I saw the letter is, we ran the malware through VirusTotal and found out through like 33 different antivirus products, nobody detected the malware. So I had these visions of the next morning, hundreds of locations in the IRS getting infected by all these IRS CID people opening these emails. Fortunately, it always pays to know low people in high places. And through a number of organizations I'm affiliated with, I was able to reach out at 11:30 at night, get a hold of several of the major antivirus vendors, and I basically asked for favors, because normally they won't incorporate signatures unless you've reached a certain threshold. And of course, none of these targeted malware will ever reach that threshold. By about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, all of the major antivirus vendors had created signatures and pushed them out, so that by 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, when the IRS people started coming in and clicking on these links, we were protected. So that's kind of some of the stuff we do behind the scenes. We're also seeing 419 scams. Now, everybody here knows what a 419 Nigerian fraud scheme. Generally, it's like you win, I got $15 million. Gee, if you'll just help me, move it to the United States, we'll give you, 50% of it. Last week, I detected the first IRS/419, and basically what it said was that you had some $200,000 refund, but we just need you to pay $200 to some Gmail account. So while I was kind of giggling and looking at it, I sent a note off to a buddy of mine in Google, and we had that site, the email account, shut down in a matter of seconds. Phishing pretext calls. If you go to the IRS website, you're going to see all over that people are getting a lot of phone calls from people claiming to be the IRS. I can see why they do it, because knowing that I'm from the IRS, you probably trust me. And I'm here to help, so obviously it's a good lead-in. Unfortunately, a lot of other people are impersonating the IRS, and in most cases, I think when somebody gets a call out of the blue, they say, "Hi, this is John Smith with the IRS." They say, "Yeah, sure," and hang up. Part of the problem, however, is that we're seeing more and more of these calls being originated from voice over IP, where they spoof the caller ID. And when we get these complaints, we look at the caller ID, we find out it's a department store or a Dunkin' Donuts, or, we've actually had one of them where they use the voicemail number for the IRS. And when you call back, it basically would ring the IRS voicemail. We've also seen instances where collection agencies will use that tactic. They'll call people knowing they won't be there. They'll leave a caller ID number that will come back to what is an IRS location, and they'll let people look at the caller ID, return the phone call, and get an IRS number, only to follow up later with the real call, and the people would accept the call. I'm sorry if I'm not awake yet, but this is like 6 hours before I'm used to waking up. We started seeing a lot of storm rockfish. In fact, I was down in another part of the country recently, and my phone rang. It was one of the guys I know from Singapore. I get calls from all over the place. And he said, I'm seeing some really strange stuff here. What it was a fraudulent email that was sent out supposedly from the IRS from an IRS manager to employees. And basically what it said was, social engineering technique was good. He said, this is the new tax law or the new tax forms or something like that. And it was from an IRS person supposedly to an IRS person. So anybody getting that would say, I get to see what the IRS talks about. Let me see. Well, what it was malware. The interesting thing is, and we've yet to figure out what we really saw, the malware looked and smelled like Storm. It used the social engineering of Storm, but it was being hosted on servers that we know were hosting rockfish. Now, generally, rockfish don't get involved in the malware, so we're tracking that right now. We've had issues with e-file, and this is probably where I spend the majority of my time and resources, trying to make sure we don't develop a major problem with e-file. And we're already starting to see letters going out with people saying, if you give us your information, we'll get your tax rebate on time. Now, as most of you know, the IRS is supposed to be sending out these $600 checks starting the second week in May. And we're just like cringing, waiting to see what's going to happen because of that. For those of you that have seen all these other sites, this is actually the real IRS website. I don't see it very often, but this is what it really looks like in the real world. When we first started having problems, we had trouble getting the word out. And I never forget, I remember going to public affairs saying, we really should put something on the website to warn people about these problems. And I was told that the front page of the IRS website is some of the most expensive web real estate in the world, that there's so much stuff people want to put there that they couldn't get it on there. I'm going to point to something here, right here, for those of you there, and as you can see, I had Starbucks coffee while I'm shaking. We now have on the front page, warnings about some of the fraudulent schemes coming on. Historically, if I detect something new, I will push this up into public affairs, and then periodically they review it, and we'll put these things out either as press releases or as comments on the website. And unfortunately, it's a never-ending battle. We're getting more and more of these schemes. But I really want to tell you, the interesting thing is none of them are overly successful. And I want to kind of hit on that for a second, because you've got to understand, most of us in this room, what we consider successful and what somebody who lives in a country where the monthly income is $500 or $600 a month determines as successful is very, very different. So a lot of times when we're dealing with these things, we'll see them put up 50 web pages, they get like one credit card. We say, well, why would they do that? But you realize that they made more money on that one credit card than they would in a month of employment, wherever they live. And if it only took them a day or two to do it, it's worth it for them. So we have to always put ourselves in their perspective. What are they willing to do, and what are they willing to do to us to get whatever money they're going to try and do? This is a copy of one of the very, very first we refer to as a get your refund. I can't imagine anybody having not seen one of these things, because I think on any given day they come to my IRS mailbox, as spam. And essentially what this is a letter that will go out and say you have a $262 refund, or $63.80 refund was the original one. And gee, if you just give us your debit card, we'll credit the refund to your account. Some people fall for it. I'll never forget, I had a call from a college professor out of a university in Florida, and he told me that he put his credit card information on one of these sites, and he asked me if I had a problem. And I said, well, have you canceled your credit card? He goes, no. I said, do you have a problem? So it goes across all walks of life of people that would fall for these. But I would like to think that today, with the publicity that we've put out there, with the press announcements, with the number of newspapers carrying articles, that we wouldn't find a lot of victims. But unfortunately, I guess it still must be happening, because we're seeing a lot of this stuff. This is the same kind of thing, just with a different format. Originally we saw one format, and I think that people that developed this thing, kind of shipped it all over the place, because we started seeing it come from different areas. Most of this stuff originates out of Eastern Europe, as most of you would probably surmise. We do see a large number of variations of it, and basically what they do is they scarf down a website, they make a few edits, and basically post the stuff up. And almost every one of these are usually hosted on compromised servers. And that's really kind of one of the banes that I have to deal with, because one of the things that I do is we track where all of these phishing sites are located at. We track it by date, time, ASN, URL, stuff like that. And we'll find when a phishing site comes up that this ASN, or this internet service provider, has been hosting 100, 150, 200 other phishing sites. They're just constantly getting broken into. And a lot of times it's not the ISP's fault. Most of the stuff that we're seeing with the Get Your Refund is really simplistic SSH brute force attacks. It doesn't matter how good the security is in your system. If you have a password called Thursday, and they can guess it, they're going to get in your system. We also will see a large spike of phishing sites right after a significant cPanel exploit comes out, or something to that effect. And those are really scary, because whenever a cPanel exploit comes out, what happens is the bad guys will go in and they'll root like hundreds of servers in a ISP, and you'll just be seeing phishing site after phishing site after phishing site for months until the people figure out what happened. Same thing, different format. A couple different variations. What we're trying to do basically to deal with these problems is, the public awareness, the press releases, putting out things through irs.gov. This is the first time I've actually spoken out at Black Hat in DC, but I've been speaking out at DEF CON and Black Hat in Vegas for 8 years. In fact, later on today, we'll be in the Birds of a Feather look, kind of like I think they're called cyber cops. It's really like a Meet the Fed. But I try and get very, very active dealing with people. I interact with a lot of companies. We have very, very strange people that will come to me and help me. Team Cumry has been a long time, person that has given us information when we've needed it. A lot of the sources of information we get are overseas. A lot of the anti-spam companies that are active in here really don't like spam, so if they see IRS spam, they'll send it to me. Unfortunately, I'm in the phone book. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, so I get calls. Just don't do it in the morning, please. And for the most part, let me go back to this. We are very aggressive when we do find out there is a site. We try and get them taken down as soon as possible. Now, we used to publish how many countries these things appeared in, and I think it was really easier at this point to say how many they haven't. And I don't think we have any countries that we haven't dealt with the phishing sites at this point. So we have run into language barriers. I think one time we had a real fiasco trying to call an Italian ISP. I mean, I didn't speak Italian and they didn't speak English, and we both agreed to not talk to each other, and we had trouble getting the site down. We have problem in the Philippines. Aruba has been a problem. But for the most part, we're pretty successful getting these down fairly quickly. I work very closely with a lot of the anti-phishing organizations. Obviously, we're somewhat of a barometer for other organizations. I mean, we're nothing, thank God, like Bank of America. I mean, but I know that, recently one of the antivirus vendors, a company that does a lot of email, I'll have to leave it at that, told us that for like the month of January, IRS finally hit 1% of all spam that they saw. Now, I guess that's good news that we're only 1%. The bad news is we're a full 1% now. Once again, what we also find is that most people that go after the IRS are equal opportunity offenders. They're going to hit eBay, PayPal, Amazon.com, and other brands. And in fact, when we go out and take the phishing sites down, in most cases, we're going to find that there is more phishing sites than just IRS. And that's why a lot of the anti-phishing organizations do want to cooperate with us, because when we take down an IRS site, we're generally taking down another site as well. We do some work with some of the brand protection companies that are out there, primarily because we have contracts with some of them, and others because they just feel like they want to help out. We also aggressively submit phishing URLs to some of the companies that do the pop-up browser alerts for anti-phishing site or for phishing sites. That's actually pretty effective, believe it or not, because in most cases, the reason we do that is if we're going to have problems taking a site down, we want to try and mitigate the effectiveness of that site as much as possible. So I know Microsoft has a service, NetGraph, I think a couple others. We make sure that as soon as that site comes up, we report it. So if there is a delay in getting it down, we can try and mitigate as best as possible. I do a lot of liaison work with a lot of the secure email providers. Those people have been really, really good. I've been able to give them some really good search strings, and in return, they'll set up free spam traps to forward stuff to me. And obviously, the key to our successful fight, I can't stop anybody from doing anything. All we can do is, once they've done it, try and identify it in a timely manner and shut the stuff down. And the more people we have reporting it, the better. Part of the problem that I started seeing is that one of the major mechanisms that we use to get these reports is essentially an email box that we set up called phishing@irs.gov. And we've had so many people get so many of these phishing emails that the number of reporting that we're getting now is going down, while at the same time we're getting exponential increase in the number. I think people are tired of reporting it. So we're starting to run into a situation where we need to come up with better ways of getting the notification that these sites are out there. And that's why some of the email providers have been extremely successful and helpful. Why are we having a problem? Well, I can recall there was a study that was done by Microsoft about 2.5 years ago, where they claimed that 1 out of every 300 computers was currently infected with something. Now, I'm not quite sure what 300 they looked at, but I know that I was on a panel at DEF CON with Gadi Evron and Paul Vixie and some other guys, and I kind of went up there and I said, that number is probably more like 1 out of 25, or maybe 1 out of 10. And the audience kind of gasped. But the reality is, that is a serious problem. A significant number of systems are infected. And in fact, when we've gone out and tried to trace through some of the systems that are hitting us and found systems in somebody's house that's infected, I know that one search warrant we did, we came up, this person had 120 viruses running on his computer. I mean, how can somebody have 120 viruses live and running? That makes our job almost impossible. And the reality is that we're seeing as Jerry alluded, we're seeing a tremendous problem where people are now successfully able to obfuscate their source IP through botnets. They're able to use these systems to generate email, spam relays, and it's really making our life really, really difficult. And just as a by the way, for fun, we do some other things every year to try and prevent problems. And we always tell people, if you don't know what you're doing with peer-to-peer, maybe you shouldn't do it. It's really kind of fun, but every year we take LimeWire, and just for the heck of it, we'll load it up on a system and run it, and then do a search for tax return. And we find like hundreds of people that have their tax returns shared to the world through some of these peer-to-peer programs. Now, I like to think that the people didn't know that their little kids did it, but they're doing something with music or something, and they just kind of shared it out wrong. But the reality is, PII, or the private information that people are losing, is just so prevalent. And for anybody that's ever victimized through one of these thefts of their private information, it's a 2 or 3 year ordeal, or longer, to try and clear your name up. So if you don't know what you're doing peer-to-peer, don't leave your personal stuff on there. Jerry touched on computer crime laws. I want to make something clear. I know the FBI is really good at broadcasting all their successes. If you took all the successful prosecutions that we've seen on things like phishing and spam and stuff like that, it would probably equate mathematically to going out on the Beltway and writing 100 speeding tickets one day a year and saying, look what we've done. I mean, the overall scheme of things, we're not making a dent out there, and it's unfortunate, but there is just so much. And part of the problem is we have jurisdictional issues where we're in one place and the bad guys are somewhere else. We have problems with trying to get information from somewhere else timely enough. Some of the mechanisms that we have to use can take 6 to 9 months. We need that information in 6 to 9 minutes. So the jurisdictional and logistical problems really cause some problems. Anybody here ever try and call an internet service provider nights, weekends, or holidays, especially if they're not inside the United States? That's a serious problem. We have a lot of problem with ISPs that are in Europe that they just don't work nights, weekends, and holidays. And they also make sure they don't publish any phone numbers anywhere. So sometimes when we're trying to take a site down, we can literally exert 2, 3, or 4 hours trying to find just a phone number to reach these people on. And what's really fun is when you send an email to abuse at whatever the ISP name is, and it comes back as mailbox full. And that happens, unfortunately, with regularity. We already talked about botnets, overwhelming limited resources. I mean, we just are getting hit, like any other organization, almost on every front. There's not a lot of us to do this kind of work, and unfortunately, I've just got to the point now I'm 235 days and 6 hours away from being eligible for retirement. I'm just not willing to work more than 18 hours a day anymore. I just won't do it. We are getting pushed a little bit to the limit with the number of complaints that we're getting. And as we said, one of the other problems is we're getting less and less reporting. The whole thing with dealing with a lot of this online fraud is you have to know about it. And the way that you're going to know about it is if somebody else gets it, they have to report it or let you know somehow. Now, obviously, we do some things on the back end to learn about these things. We run lots of email addresses that, I plug all sorts of bulletin boards, and, anybody knows what Mailinator is and those kind of services, But the bottom line is, reporting is important to us, and it's It's what enables us to identify the site and take it down. We talked about, a lot of systems out there that they're using to hit us with, or botnets. One of the things that, I guess I just want to, skip forward. I know we're getting close on time, but there's two things that according to Andy Freed, we need to start doing to try and clean up all this mess. And it's going to get to the point where it's either going to melt or we're going to fix it. Anybody that's been in the internet for any kind of business or for a length of time knows that things aren't going well out there. The two things that I've seen, just like from a perception standpoint, is one of the problems with credit cards is that you're able to do something with that credit card information by simply having the name and the number. We need to find a way to make these credit cards not useful by just getting that kind of information. And most of these crimes that we're seeing are much more getting away from traditional fraud, and they're trying to get much more high tech with malware, viruses, and backdoor kind of programs. And a lot of the stuff is coming off of legitimate websites. I don't know what to tell you. I know that in my area, and I don't want to be misquoted here as saying that, I don't like Microsoft, but, if you're in a really mission critical environment, and you're going out to a lot of websites, you might want to maybe consider thinking about, strengthening that box to not use something that's other than just Microsoft. Have different products, because if you're going out and downloading malware designed to run on Microsoft, you're going to get infected. So, generally we have a number of different systems, including Microsoft, that we'll use for some of our data extraction on the internet. Keyloggers and bank loggers are becoming a real problem. Anybody that's ever run this malware through sources like VirusTotal will know that the antivirus products are not able to keep up with this new malware. And a lot of people think that because they're running antivirus, they're protected. That's not the case anymore. And with the directed stuff that we're seeing, storm-related and in most cases the Better Business Bureau type malware, none of it will get detected by your antivirus product. So we're seeing a tremendous number of systems being infected, and they're actually going right after the bank accounts and credit card information by using keyloggers. And that's becoming a real serious problem. Pretty soon we won't need phishing sites. They're just going to get it through the back end. And obviously the one thing we can't solve is greed. If you get an email saying you're getting an $800 refund, and you don't think you're supposed to have an $800 refund, and you go after it anyway, that's greed. And that's what most of these schemes play on. And there's nothing you or I are ever going to do with greed. This is something I always like to present to people. Everybody in this room knows that the IRS doesn't initiate contact through email. But how many, if they got this email, would respond to it? This is the social engineering we're concerned about. Obviously, an 800 number could be answered in Ukraine, it could be Czechoslovakia, it could be anywhere in the world with voice over IP. The bottom line is the IRS never initiates contact with the taxpayers via the email. We'll respond to email, we never initiate it. Any quick questions? I got about a minute and a half. No, really, no.
With the tax rebates coming up, do you anticipate a huge amount of scamming coming?
The question is, why expect a lot of scamming coming with the rebates? I don't have all the details on how they're going to totally implement it. It's my understanding that most of the rebates will go out based on qualifying income, which means they would have already had to file a return that would have been approved. So I'm hoping that if that's the case, there are going to be adequate protections to deal with most loopholes that would surface. There had been another version that had been recommended, I think, by the House, and that wasn't the one that passed. That would have been just, sending an email requesting it, basically. But I think with this version, there should be adequate security. Yes, yes, sir. Do I see a rise in DNS poisoning attacks? In what I'm seeing, no, I don't see it. I do know it's happening, but in what's been targeting us, I've not seen DNS poisoning attacks. Anything else? Thank you very much.
You'll be available in when you take more questions.
Yes, I'll be available, and I'll be available. Thank you.